Hello, and welcome to another Webinar Wednesday. I'm Jason Hauser, an editor here at the RCU, and today I'll be going over how to create newsletters, or digitally distributed periodic updates that you can email to your students, their families, your teachers, administrators, or really anyone else who's interested in what you're doing. Before we begin, though, I'd like to remind you that all of our webinars are hosted online. This episode will go up soon after it airs today, joining the other past episodes that we have on the RCU's website. You can get there by going to this address, but also just by going to rcu.msstate.edu, clicking on the Communications tab, and then selecting Webinars from the drop-down menu. Keep in mind, too, that our next webinar is March 13th, and it'll be a follow-up to our previous webinar on social media tips. Okay, with all that said, let's go ahead and talk about newsletters. Here we have an overview of the topics we'll go over today and the order in which we'll consider them. We'll first discuss the purpose of newsletters, and then talk about how to create a professional newsletter, focusing especially on design, editing, messaging, and the importance of a regular delivery. After that, we'll go over how to create engaging content, and finally, how to get your letter out or disseminate it to the public. So first, let's get started by making sure we're all clear on what the purpose of newsletters are. Newsletters are a great way to keep people informed about the goings-on of your programs. They not only provide news, but a regularly delivered newsletter also builds relationships with those interested in the program. When people get occasional updates, they feel more invested in the program, and in turn, your program becomes a more visible part of the community. This kind of outreach also has logistical importance. Newsletters are a great way of making sure that all your important information, especially important dates, are well advertised. Finally, newsletters offer an opportunity to, in marketing terms here, brand your program. Each program has a unique identity and goals suited to the needs of the school and the community. As a visible medium, regular newsletters let you communicate that identity and those goals to your community. In other words, they let you explain who you are and what you're about. The color scheme, the content of the newsletter, the way it's sent out, all these things say something about your program. And that's why it's important to think very carefully about what you think the message should be. Creating content for your newsletters is probably not going to be too difficult. Your teachers and your students are doing really cool and interesting stuff every day. But crafting a newsletter out of that content that shines a positive light on the program, well, that might be a little bit more difficult. The best way to overcome potential difficulties is to be thoughtful and deliberate about your newsletter from the very beginning, and brainstorm what you think your newsletter should be about, what it should look like. Think, who is your audience? Do you want your tone to be formal or more casual? Who's going to create content? Are you having students write? Teachers? Administrators? How do you want it to look? How do you want it to reach people? Spending time addressing all of these considerations before you even begin putting the newsletter together will result in professional, accessible communications. And professionalism really is the goal here. In every outreach resource, in fact, from public-facing Twitter accounts to print editions of major newspapers, professionalism is always the goal, and a lack of professionalism will result in people not taking your newsletter and possibly even your program very seriously. Think about YouTube videos that you clicked out of because the camera was so blurry, or that website you didn't stay on because it was dated and poorly designed. Professional newsletters engage readers in ways that unprofessional newsletters simply don't. So what makes a professional newsletter? Professional newsletters are newsletters that are well-designed, edited for grammar and clarity, focused solely on the program, and delivered regularly. So let's take some time to discuss each one of these professional qualities individually. Professional emails look professional. They are well-designed. They feel professional. The first step you should take in designing a professional newsletter is to consult with a colleague or a student who has an eye for design. Ask for their help to come up with a professional-looking format. At this stage, you'll begin to investigate the different computer programs and online services that will help you put together an email. We'll go into more detail on that later, but think if you want something you can create using just your computer's word processor, or a program more focused on newsletter creation and dissemination, something like Adobe Spark or even a dedicated dissemination service. This is also the time to decide on your color scheme and make sure that each color you're planning to use is complementary. If you don't want to use your school colors, look online for color schemes based on the color wheel. You'll find a ton of good schemes that include the hex number or the identifying number of each color. Once you have a color scheme, stick with it. You want readers to be able to instantly recognize, based on the look alone, that this is your newsletter. That's you branding your program. It's best to generate your newsletter's content well in advance of when you plan to send it out, so you can check for mistakes. If a single person puts together and distributes a newsletter, you can bet that you'll almost always have a typo or an unclear sentence in there. One of the biggest hallmarks of professionalism is grammatical correctness. Your program is professional and your newsletter needs to reflect that. So find your school's grammarian, every school has one, and ask them to give it a once-over. If you have a journalism program, you might consider reaching out to whoever oversees that curriculum and asking them if they would mind putting eyes on it, possibly even involving students in the process. The basic rule of ensuring clarity and grammatical correctness is to get as many people to look over your newsletter as possible. Also, make sure that your newsletters are always on message. The only appropriate content is content directly related to your program and or its students. Anything else can make the newsletter appear unfocused, and at times, including additional material might even create additional troubles. Using school resources to promote political or religious positions is always unwise, as is using school equipment to promote personal causes or even side businesses. Now, about delivery, newsletters are not tweets. That is, they don't get sent out whenever the inspiration strikes. In designing your newsletter, make sure you think about how often it will be sent out. Are you making a quarterly newsletter? Do you plan to send out one newsletter a semester or one a month? Decide on a distribution schedule and then stick with it. Just a word of caution, weekly newsletters are very difficult to do well. Generating content for each week, editing that content, and then putting the newsletter together often takes a lot more time than we might assume, and being late or skipping a week is unprofessional. The best approach is to shoot for a monthly distribution. The first Monday of the new month or the first school day of the new month are both good options. So those are the general principles of professional newsletters. So what should you actually include? So long as you adhere to those principles, you can really include whatever you want. Here at the RCU, we support a number of different groups with our digital distribution. And we've learned that it's best to think not only in terms of content, but what kind of content you're distributing. A newsletter essentially is a short magazine, so it helps to organize and develop with a magazine format in mind. Think, as magazine editors do, in terms of categories based on length and importance. Do you have a feature, a front page piece that's the most important? Think about what you want to read off your newsletter. An alternative to the headline model is to begin with a letter from the editor, or in the case of schools, a letter from the program's director or lead teacher. Generally, educators and administrators use this space to provide a broad overview of what's happening on campus. And then what follows behind that is the supplemental material, made up of the smaller stories and reports. At the RCU, we encourage those we work with to always include an important date section near the beginning of their newsletters. It does the housekeeping work of making sure stakeholders are informed and provides a quick reference for readers who want to know what's going on but don't have the time to read an entire newsletter. Keep in mind that most readers won't make it past the first couple of pages, no matter how engaging the content. That's just the reality of digital newsletters and busy teachers. So front load the most important stuff. And for the rest of the letter, just report on whatever you feel is important to your programs. Many of our newsletters like to include a student spotlight, which offers an opportunity to recognize a student and also incentivizes other students to excel. Also consider a teacher spotlight, as well as a news and notes section, in which you can put the one-sentence odds and ends that are interesting but don't really deserve their own space. Now, it's important to include as many visual elements as possible in your newsletter. Newsletters that are all text fatigue readers. Many people who open a newsletter and see nothing but words immediately close it. They're tired before they even begin to read it. Make use of high-quality pictures. The ones you take with your smartphone are just fine, so long as you have your device set to take high-resolution photos and you don't compress them when you put them in the newsletter. Now, color schemes also fight reader fatigue. For several of our newsletters, we switch between background and font colors. This is most effective when you have clearly defined and blocked off sections of text. In the end, though, the design is up to you. It is, after all, your newsletter. As long as you keep it professional, you'll do well. Now, there are countless ways to construct and send out your newsletter. The preferred method varies based on your needs, your resources, and how many people you'll serve. On the low-tech end of the spectrum, you can create a newsletter in Microsoft Word or Adobe Spark And Adobe Spark does offer more sleek design options. If you create a newsletter with one of these programs, what you'll end up with is a PDF that you can send out to readers as an attachment from a personal email address. Most mail clients have ways to compile contacts into groups, and you can also create a Wufoo or SurveyMonkey link that people can use to sign up for the email. There are also professional email marketing services, but unlike Word and Spark, they charge a monthly user fee. The advantage, though, is they offer easy ways to design newsletters and have ways for readers to sign up. In addition, they put your newsletter, graphics and all, right in the body of the email. Whereas with Word and Spark, again, you'll only be able to send it as an attachment. The more steps you make readers take to open and view a newsletter, the less likely they are to read it. If you have the resources and want the integration that these services offer, check out online services like Constant Contact, Mad Mimi, and MailChimp. Each offers different tiers of services for different prices. Do some research, see what features you need, and go from there. Remember, choosing a format is part of the design process, so take your time and select one that really fits. So that's all for today's webinar. Make sure to join us next time at 11 a.m. on March 13th. We'll be doing a follow-up to our original social media tips webinar. So go back, watch that first one, and then join us on March 13th to hear our tips and best practices for advanced social media users. Make sure, too, to tell us if you have a story to tell. You can contact us at rcu.msd.edu/connections/share your stories if you have an interesting idea for a story that you'd like to appear in one of our magazines. At that web address, you'll be given a simple form. It asks for basic information, and you can even upload photos. You can also just email us at helpdesk@rcu.msd.edu. If you don't mind, use magazine submission or press release in the subject line. That makes sure it finds us quickly. If you have any questions about newsletters or the webinar series in general, feel free to contact us. You can get me at jason.hauser@rcu.msd.edu. And make sure to follow us on social media too. Well, that's all, and thanks so much.